Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon for our talk on the importance of designing for online accessibility. I'll start by giving you a little overview of who we are and why this topic is important to us first. Emma and I not only went to the same high school, but we also went on to become English language teachers in the same Brisbane City School back in 1997. And from there, we lived and worked overseas and returned to find employment in university English language centres, Emma at ACU and me at UQ. Just last year, I joined Emma in the ACU Education Pathways team as a digital curriculum designer. And together we oversee about 50 units on the learning management system, which is currently sitting in Moodle and soon to be Canvas. We're really passionate about the work we do in supporting our diploma students because they tend to have more challenges than the bachelor cohorts. We've got higher proportions of school leavers, international students, students from rural and remote areas, as well as some from low socioeconomic backgrounds and many who are first in family to reach higher education. Our goal is to serve our increasingly diverse student cohorts by developing accessible online learning, and that's what we'd like to talk to you about today. But that's enough about us. We'd like to invite you to tell us a little something about you by using the chat. We'd love to know if you've heard of or used WCAG guidelines before. And we'd also love to know what kind of online learning you design or hope to design. So please don't be afraid. Type us a message in the chat so we know enough about you and can understand your interest in designing for online accessibility. We haven't got anything there yet, Emma, so maybe people are warming up.
Keep popping, you can pop your questions or your comments into the chat at any time.
Thanks, James. Oh, great. We've got some people who want to create their own online course. And thanks, Sandra.
All right. Well, I suppose we should move on, Jess, and look at what WCAG is. So what is WCAG 2.1 and 2.0 and why is it important? So WCAG 2.1 is currently the Web Content Accessibility Guideline that was developed in 2018. Previously, there was WCAG 2.0, which came out in 2008, but 2.1 is now being used. So WCAG are guidelines for developing online content for people with a range of disabilities, so including people with mobility issues, visual issues, hearing issues, mental health, neurodivergent issues. So what it looks at, it is a total of 78 success criteria, and it's marked on 3 different levels. So level A means that your basic accessibility. Level AA is strong accessibility, and currently I believe a lot of government departments are aiming to or have reached level AA accessibility standards. And then there's level AAA, which is excellent accessibility. And Jess and I are going to walk you through what these levels mean and how the 78 criteria. We're not going to look at all of them today, but we will have a look at some of them. But before we start, let's have a quick look at some of the statistics in Australia. So in 2018, statistics showed that 6.3% of university or other higher education students had some kind of disability. 10.8% of students studying at TAFE or technical college had some kind of disability, and 12.9% of students at other educational institutions, so perhaps doing a business college, for example, or an apprenticeship. And I think this really speaks, that's 30% of students. So I think this really speaks to the fact that a lot of us are teaching or have taught ALICOS in these kind of institutions. And it's probably really, really important that we take into consideration disabilities and accessibility as we are designing online content. It's important also to note that not all students choose to disclose their disabilities. So these are the statistics. These statistics are showing only the students who have disclosed. All right. I just thought I'd mention this study because I thought it was really interesting as well. In 2022, there was an audit of 5 Western Australian universities. It was conducted by the Centre of Accessibility Australia, and it was called Higher Education for All. Now, this project, I think, shows that you can see down here, there's no 100%, none of them had reached 100% at the beginning of the audit. Or at the end of the audit for that matter. But I think it shows that it's difficult to get accessibility right without time, effort, and a real understanding of what online content compliancy means. So I believe these universities now have the audit, they know where they were compliant and where they need to build compliancy. So if you'd like to read the report, the link is there. Jess, over to you.
Thanks. Now, if you were lucky enough to catch Maria Mateus's presentation yesterday, then you may have come across her personas. Personas in this context are profiles of learners with barriers to learning. Maria covered some learner stories that included a student who could only access their LMS via a mobile because of a situational predicament that he was in. Some other students who had disabilities we could see, like blindness or a broken arm, and others with disabilities we couldn't see, like colour blindness or deafness. So to keep all possible learners in mind, we can use this persona spectrum for an at-a-glance view of obstacles that relate to different senses. If we have a look at the top left, and we're looking at touch there, we can see that we may have someone with a limb loss, a permanent situation, or we may have someone with a broken arm trying to access their online content, or otherwise a new mum holding her baby. But we can imagine then if we've got people who are hearing impaired, visually impaired, or speech impaired in what could be a permanent, temporary, or situational manner, then the numbers that we looked at earlier could actually be a whole lot higher than we think. So we clearly understand why it's important to design for online accessibility. Now let's look at the principles that can help us do that well.
All right, so there are 4 key principles of WCAG, and they are known as PAW. So the first one is perceivable, second is operable, understandable, and robust. And Jess and I are going to walk you through what these 4 principles mean. So the first principle, perceivable, relates to whether a student or a content user is able to access the material in a way that is accessible for them. So this means that it's really important to consider different formats for the materials you put online. And I'll just walk you through some of the key principles here. So the first one is text alternatives. So alt text or alternative text for non-text content is obviously really important to add to your materials. So text alternatives include alternative text for maps, obviously charts, videos, audios, and computer simulations. If you look at time-based media, this is talking about videos, for example. And again, if you have a video, it should have captions or a transcript for the video, or perhaps an audio track, MP3, or even better, it could have all of them to allow for your students different ways of accessing the content you put online. Adaptable is fairly simple, similar to the one above. Present your material in different formats. And also, if there is an input field, make sure that you name it correctly, not just type here. It might be type your name here. Distinguishable, so there's an ease of users to see and hear the content, and a clear contrast between foreground and background. And this last point, I think, is one that is easy to get correct, but at the same time, it's often not correct when you have a look online at different websites, for example. So clear contrast, down here, I have 2 tools. One of them is called the WebAIM Color Contrast Checker. And this is a fantastic tool for checking whether your color contrast, your foreground and your background are accessible to all students. There's also something called the Amara captioning website, which is just an alternative to captioning through YouTube. I think YouTube doesn't always get the captions right. And as English teachers, I think it does not a great job always of punctuation. So I'm just going to show you this color contraster. Am I still sharing?
You are.
Great. Okay, so this is an example of a contrast checker. This is my favorite. It's WebAIM, and they have a lot of other resources on there. But you can see here, I've done a really pretty color, I think, but unfortunately, the contrast ratio is 1 to 1. So it's a really, really low contrast. And you can see here that it has failed normal text in both AA and AAA level. It's failed large text, and it's failed graphical input. So basically, if I had, or anyone who was trying to read this had a visual impairment or had forgotten their glasses, for example, they would probably not be able to read this. It is inaccessible for them. But if I change this color, for example, to, let's see, the foreground color, I might make red. Background color, I might make yellow. This is a combination I see quite often. Okay, you can see it's still not high enough. Now, the contrast ratio has to be 4.5 to 1. And so you can see here, it's passed for the large text, but unfortunately for regular everyday text, it's too low. Okay, so if we go one more, let's go black foreground on a white background, or whitish, 16.59. So that's really nice, and you'll see that every different level has passed. So it's fun to play around with this, and I have played around with it a lot. And I think one of the things that I've noticed is that I am quite good now at choosing and seeing what is accessible text and what is not. All right. The second principle of WCAG is that it's operable. And I think Maria mentioned this yesterday as well. What operable means is all content should be operable on a keyboard, which means that you should be able to use, for example, the tab key to move across the screen in a logical order, so that you can access the test without a mouse. Time is another interesting one. So I know I've been guilty in the past of giving my students a set time to complete an online quiz, but WCAG says that you should, 1, provide students with enough time, and 2, they should be able to adjust the time to suit themselves. So I'd say probably, unless it's an assessment situation where they may need extra time, and that would depend on your institutional policies, it's probably best to leave the timer off. All right, the third flash rule is an interesting one. This relates to seizures and physical reactions. So what it says is that 3 flashes or 3 fast-moving images in 1 second can cause seizures or physical reactions. And back in 2000, there was an interesting story. I don't know if any of you got to see the Pikachu movie, but I think on its first release in America, there were flashes everywhere. And I believe about 12 children went to hospital with seizures because there were too many flashes. So be careful of that one. It can be exciting to have flashes, but just watch the timing. Users should be able to easily navigate through and find content. So I think Jess will talk about this more, but headings should be structured in order, and content should be nice and clear and easy to go through. And finally, headings and labels are clear, and links have a clear purpose. So I've added 2 more tools here, the Wave Web Accessibility Checker. So this is a tool where you can take a URL and pop it into the Wave Checker, or the accessibility checker, and it will tell you what's good about that and what's not. The other tool, this is actually a YouTube channel, and it's called the Accessibility Guy. This channel has so many useful videos on creating accessible content, everything from PDFs to adding something to Canvas and making sure that is accessible as well. So very useful. Just before I hand over to Jess, oops, I didn't do that. I'm just going to get rid of that because this is the web. guy. Okay, so what I wanted to show you was actually how to create a PowerPoint and make it accessible. So Jess and I have accessible tools, but we've made our slides accessible. But if you're not sure how, I'm sure some of you already know how, these are the steps to check your accessibility and make them user-friendly and accessible. So first you go to Files, you go down to Info, then you go to Check for Issues, and you go Check Accessibility. Now you'll notice here that I have an error in a missing object description, and I also have to check the reading order. So these are quite easy to fix once you know how. So this picture here, I could add a description or I could generate alt text. But in fact, it's just a decoration. So I'm going to make it decorative so that anyone using a screen reader, their screen reader will just skip over this picture because it's not necessary for the content. Okay, if I go back to checking the reading order, I can verify the object order. Now, what this does is it shows me 1, 2, 3, 4, shows me the order a screen reader will read this PowerPoint. Now, you can see that it's all back to front and awful. So to fix this, I can use the arrows to move things up and down. And once it's accessible and in the right order, I just get rid of the buttons and this it won't show up. It is now an accessible slide. Okay, so back to the PowerPoint and
Thanks.
over to you, Jess.
Thanks. So next in the acronym POUR is the U for understandable. And in order for our content to be understandable, we need to pay attention to two main things. Is the language we've chosen readable? And is the structure and navigation through that content predictable? When it comes to readability, we've got lots of choices to make. We can choose plain language over complex language. We can avoid unnecessary wordiness and complexity, and we can help our students by adding a key for any abbreviations or jargon. The other way we can support our learners is to reduce the cognitive load by making sure our content appears and operates in a consistent manner. This predictability will allow students who are looking, say, for week 1 key terms with the definitions to be able to find their week 2 key terms in the same place on a page. Let's have a look at some of the ways we can make sure our content is both readable and predictable. Checking the readability of your text is actually an easy 2-step process that you can do in Microsoft Word. You may need to check that your proofing settings have selected Show Readability Statistics first, and then once that's enabled, you can use the editor function to open your document statistics and generate a list of statistics like the ones you can see here. Now, if you focus on the third heading there, you can see readability. And the first thing on the list is the Flesch Reading Ease score. The document I was testing received a score of 35, and that fits nicely between 30 and 50, which is the recommended level for higher education. If you were teaching a high school level class, then you could aim for a higher score, something between 50 and 60. So once we've established that our content is in fact readable, our job is to make deliberate choices about heading sizes and layout on a page so that we can make the process of finding content as easy as possible. You can see that our semester-long units start and continue with exactly the same structure. So once we have our accessible PowerPoints with our accessible Word documents all sitting on our LMS in a consistent fashion, labeled with predictable headings, and we're ready to test the final principle. Is our learning design robust? For those of us who are lucky enough to work on well-established LMSs, we know that they function across a number of browsers and operating systems, and we can rely on the fact that it will be robust enough as long as what we add to it is also robust. In saying that, it's still worth testing. Just this week, Emma and I started building in Canvas. We came up with a beautiful design, and then we opened our mobile phones to check it, and the placement of our image and the attribution had ruined our expectation, so we had to start all over again. So once your content has passed the device and browser test, we need to check that our online content can be accessed by assistive technologies or screen readers. So depending on which hardware and software you're using, you'll have a number of screen readers already available to you. These days, some websites have their very own embedded on their web pages. For me, on my Mac, in my accessibility settings, I can turn on the VoiceOver utility, which will read anything I select. Otherwise, in Microsoft Word, I can choose to read aloud and select from a wide range of voices. Now, giving a screen reader a go is a great tip because it's the best way to imagine the challenges that some of our students are facing and to help remove any barriers that we may come across. That brings us to the end of our PAW acronym. Back to you, Emma.
Okay, just quickly to finish off with some key takeaways. So I suppose our key takeaways are: 1, design with accessibility in mind from the beginning of content creation. Remember the PAW principles. Find other accessibility champions. Talk to the people in your institutions. Join professional groups like AdSet and the Centre for Accessibility Australia, and the links are there. They both have some incredible resources. And you can build your skills using resources such as AdSet Webinar. Accessibility in Office 365 walks you through all the different accessibility tools in Office 365 in Windows 10 and 11. So to finish, Jess and I would like to thank you for coming to our presentation today. We are championing accessibility one step at a time, so feel free to reach out to us.
Thank you.